Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we discuss the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world leading global brands. Today, we're joined by Chuck Stevens, Global Head of Inclusion, Diversity and Belonging at Booking.com. Welcome to the show, Chuck. How are you?
Doing well, Chris. It's a pleasure to see you.
Even though we spoke a few months ago, it felt like a long time ago. So nice to see you again.
Absolutely.
How you been? How are you anyway? How you been?
I appreciate it. You know, that's a question I think a lot of times we ask, and it's a throwaway phrase, and people really don't want to hear how you're doing. But now more than ever, I think it's critical that we really kind of talk about where we're doing. And there's a scale that a guy named Rob Stevens created, unrelated, that ranks you on a kind of scale of 1 to 10. And you know, I got to be honest with you. I'm not doing what I normally do as far as that scale goes, but feel pretty upbeat and good, and you know, looking forward to the new year. Let's put 2020 behind us as quickly as possible, please.
I think everyone's feeling that way right now.
Absolutely.
Although I'm getting the others saying, surely it can't be worse, Chris. And I'm like, I don't know.
Let's not tempt fate, please. You know.
Yeah. Or in the UK, as you probably heard, we're going to be the sort of the test subjects for the new vaccine, so that should be fun over the next few months as well. So that's kind of what we're the kind of talk of town over here at the moment as well. And just for those that aren't aware, where are you? Because you're not based in America, you know the accent. Let me just start there before we jump in. Tell everyone a bit about yourself and your journey and background to where we are now.
Absolutely. American, as you can probably tell from the big accent. Grew up in the south of the U.S. If folks have ever seen the movie The Help, I was born in Jackson, Mississippi in 1966, but we were closer to being the help than having help. And so that baby that's in that movie could have been me. That experience of growing up around racism and all of those kind of norms very much, I think, led to me doing diversity inclusion work. And, you know, I think about the messages I heard from society and family and frankly, and some friends in some cases. And all I knew about were who my friends were at school and who I wanted to play with. And there was a disconnect there that I think is very much stuck with me and key to who I am today. Most of the early part of my career was in consulting. I did a lot of work around life sciences in the US still. And I was a champion, a business champion of diversity and inclusion. We were expected to be what was involved with what was called practice management committees. And so I got involved with diversity and inclusion. People were really excited to have this white dude involved with the conversation. Little did they know I was getting ready to come out. And so then all of a sudden everybody was like, oh, now we get it. But that's where I started my diversity career, was moving into working in D&I at Deloitte in the US, leading all of their employee resource groups, was my first diversity gig. And since then I went on to lead diversity at Booz Allen Hamilton, then had the opportunity to come to Europe and really go global and led gender diversity for Barclays, was at Google leading diversity and inclusion in EMEA. And then Booking asked if I'd be interested in setting up the D&I team. And it's rare you get to create something from scratch. And it was too appealing to not jump on.
Well, I was going to ask you, what was it that attracted you to Booking.com? And that makes sense now, being able to build that from scratch. And as you said, it's very rare that you have the opportunity to do that. And given your past experience, I'm sure that was something you were super excited about. And I know you're still on that journey. Before we go any further, you kind of made a joke a second ago about obviously being a white male in this role, but I'm sure there has been, is that been a challenge for you?
Yes and no. Like all things, I think there are times that every challenge becomes an opportunity. There are organizations that will not talk to a white male diversity leader because they feel that it's got to be, quote unquote, a diverse candidate in order to successfully do the role. I even asked some kind of, if I'm working with, particularly with college grads or recent college grads or college students, you know, I'll come out and say, you know, you got to be asking, what's the white middle-aged American dude going to tell me about D&I, particularly in Europe, you know, and normally you see a lot of hands and chuckles and like, yeah, you know, there's even been a lot of cases whenever I showed up at organizations where people were kind of upset about the fact it was a white guy coming in, you know, but whenever I go through and say, you know, if I tell you I'm gay, does it make a difference? And I physically see people go, oh, makes sense. Now we got it. Yeah. And I question, you know, how many boxes do each of us have to check before we're allowed to be qualified for it? Mm-hmm. So, it's that piece around inclusion working in some different ways. But I'm a labor economist by background, so a lot of these pieces really fit into why I feel like I'm qualified to do it. But at the same time, there are a lot of, if I assume a white male leadership team, there's a lot of times that those guys, will ask me questions that they wouldn't ask a person of color or someone that's
Oh,
disabled.
okay.
And so there's one of those things where they're like, why are you in this? And, and what's really happening, or they can let their guard down. Because I find a lot of leaders are just really scared. And I mean, leaders in all of us, not just the letterhead names, are scared that they're going to do something or say the wrong thing that prevents us from engaging.
Mm. So it's kind of easier for them to say it to you as a white male because they feel kind of more comfortable, which is where you said the advantage. You said there's there's the opportunities there, and that's one of the things that come out of it. You kind of tapped into that. Well, actually, this is something where I can leverage that to have more of these conversations.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. When did you, if you don't mind me asking, when did you come out?
I was about 30 years old, and it had been at Deloitte for probably 2 years. Before Deloitte, I'd worked at a family-owned business that was not my family. An amazing opportunity because I was able to have very broad business experience, everything from a call center to consulting with nonprofits, to logistics, and working with UPS and other kind of companies. And my career wouldn't have been over, but I feel like it would have been hindered based on the jokes I heard some of the leadership making about other gay people that were in the organization. And so I went to Deloitte to be able to have kind of brand name recognition. And I was curious to see what it's going to be like. And Deloitte was a great experience. And, frankly, for the most part, I don't ever feel that my career was ever hindered or necessarily helped by being gay. But I did have a partner at one point, this is, late 1990s, that said, don't come out to colleagues, or not to colleagues, to customers, because, we don't know how they're going to receive. And, once you'd be, it was well intended.
I get
but,
it. Yeah.
Ironically, there was a client that was here in the Netherlands at the time, and the client started asking me questions, and he was like, "So are you married?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "You dating?" And I felt like it was like a shark following me through. And all of a sudden, being Dutch, he's like, "Are you gay?" And I'm like, "I am not lying to this man that I'm going to work very closely with for the next 2 years."
And why should you anyway? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And so I went through and I said, "Yep, I am." And he kind of smiled. I knew it was going to be okay. Then he grabbed me by the hand and he pulled me across this huge room where we were doing a team building event, and introduced me to his best friend, who was a woman, and he had just been the best man in their wedding, in his best friend's wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the night, I had plans to go to everybody's house for dinner. I'm getting hugs from everybody, and the same partner went through and said, "What the hell happened? I've never seen someone gel with the team so fast." And I said, "Well, they asked, and I told, because I'm not lying to them." And she was like, "Forget everything I told you. Do what you need to do."
Yeah, I asked that question because there's a number of your peers that I've spoken to that have come out later on in life, and they've said that they've attributed to that being a pivotal moment in their career where they can finally. We talk about bringing your full self to work, right? We hear this all the time, and many of them felt like they really wasn't, and in terms of not sharing it with clients, for example, from that moment onwards, it was like they were unleashed. So just, did you get that feeling in some way?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer that we all need to be authentic, and that's scary.
Yes.
Not while I was at Deloitte, but someone I had worked with, Christy Smith. She went on to lead diversity inclusion at Apple. Christy did some work that I thought was brilliant on covering, and it's available on the internet if you Google it. And it's this idea that we all censor ourselves. And 60% of white men also censor themselves. They're hiding, different elements of who they are. And the idea of covering is like, in the history of working, I can't think of a time, for example, where I saw a woman wear a sari that was of Indian descent at work. At booking, I've started to see some of my colleagues that identify as being African or are from Africa wearing a head wrap, but for a long time, I never saw that, And I'm sure there's going to be some of your listeners they're Black women, or that'll be talking about having natural hair rather than, than the relaxed hair and things like that. And we're all doing it, but we try and put up this veneer of who and what we are, that it takes a lot of energy and time.
Yeah.
And when you're able to kind of take some of that down and, be authentic, it's a great liberator,
It's
I mean,
it's exhausting, isn't it? Like, because
it's
for me,
exhausting.
when I started my first job, I came from a very kind of urban, kind of ghetto area of London, and kind of literally had the highest crime rate in the whole of the UK. So, on a council estate, so I had the opposite, where there was only a few white kids where I grew up. In my classroom, there was 2 white kids as well, and I spoke with a certain slang and accent from where I grew up. So when I went into the business world, the first thing I was told to do is, you can't talk like Chris. And I was like, what do you mean? So you have to speak, the Queen's English and pronounce X, and I was, even to the point where my manager said, here's the Financial Times, educate yourself and talk like this language here. And I was like, this is really weird. And they took it so far. And this is obviously like 10 years ago, but it was still, even now, it's still shocking to think. So they brought in a guy who did elocution sessions with people to teach us how to pronounce and say word. I was like, what have I signed up to here? So basically, you want no part of what makes Chris,
right?
You see, so you want to just replicate this kind of persona that you feel is what people, clients, customers, want to see. And it was really, I didn't know any different because it was my first job.
Yeah.
But even walking on the sales floor, and I was like in London Bridge, in this city, and I was like, how is there not, like, it was like 300 white males. And I grew up obviously in East London, where it's like very multicultural, and I was in shock, and I couldn't explain it to everyone. They're like, what do you mean you feel uncomfortable being in a room with loads of white males? I was like, no, it's not that. It was weird. And they're like, what do you mean? But you're a white male. And I was like,
it's just not your reality. I mean, but I will say that, I do value when someone shows you who they are. In the case of that company showing you what they thought, the fact that they wanted to go through and say, hey, let's understand what's going to help you be successful. Now, we may not agree on their terms of success, but the fact that they were willing to go through and do some training and education to help you at least understand what some of the challenges were ahead of you was a good thing. Because I can work to change kind of norms and the acceptability of all of that, but that takes a really long time to do. Yeah. But if you don't know the rules of the game, for lack of a better word, how can you even choose whether you want to play the game or not?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I don't believe in this, and I speak fine for what I want to do and who I am.
I realized the moment I became Chris, people actually, it took a long time. Even now on this show with you, a lot of people that do similar shows, they'll be wearing a suit right now or a shirt, and they wouldn't have this crazy background for people that can see me right now. But I was like, if I'm going to be here every day and do this, I want to be in a place that I feel like I belong, and it represents Chris and who I am and what we do. I don't need to create this facade. If you listen to episodes 1 to 20 of the HR Leaders podcast, you'll see something completely different, because I thought I needed to be this picture of what our audience wants to see, as opposed to just being Chris. So it is scary, and even during this whole kind of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything, I was even worried about saying things, because like, who cares about a white male perspective? And I was quite ashamed, I'll be honest, when my wife came to me. My wife's black, I have a mixed race daughter, and said, why haven't you said anything yet? And I was like, well, no one wants to hear what I have to say, I don't think. And then she goes, no, that's the problem. And I was like, you're completely right. And then we started, I kind of posted a video kind of sharing my perspective, and people were very supportive. But it is a lot of people just don't say anything at all because they're so worried about what people
Chris,
are say.
I'm glad to hear you tell that story, because I had this exact conversation with someone that's a very good professional on my team, but is new to the diversity space. And she was struggling with exactly what we're talking about, but it's not me they need to hear from. And I'm like, if you're not willing to lean into the discomfort as a, to embrace it and say, hey, there's things I don't know, I want to learn, as a diversity professionals, who is, Yeah. And so it's each of us going through and finding, and it's a great topic for the kind of everyday inclusion and kind of fostering it, is how do we each go through and find the wherewithal to do the self work and take an assessment, do some work ourselves, and then reach out to those that are different and say, hey, educate me, challenge me. And when I screw up, tell me I screwed up. I'll own it,
Yeah. And that's also okay. No one's
That's okay.
perfect. No one has all the answers. I think that's what people are so worried about. Let's talk about obviously the last few months of, and it's, say a few months, 8 months. It's always been a year, kind of brought its own set of challenges. What has worked for you and the team to help kind of build and organize a community of action during these challenges and times?
Well, thankfully, there's a couple of things we had done previously that really paid some benefits longer term. Booking, we knew from some work within booking whenever I started that even though we hadn't had a diversity and inclusion team, we knew that our people viewed diversity as what they loved the most about booking, and also what kept them there. In Amsterdam, and this is largely true globally, we're in 14 buildings today, scattered across the city, but there's more than 170 nationalities in each of our buildings. Most of the people that come to work at Booking are rabid travelers, and it's truly a global community. So when we talk about diversity, most of the time we're actually talking about, we love the multinational stuff. And since we're travelers, if it's London, I don't want to just go get on the eye. I want to go to Brixton or Hackney or Shoreditch, and I want to see how people live, And so that was one of the real strengths of Booking. And so I'm like, we got to figure out how to embrace that adventure in there. And so we created something called Be Inclusionist. And Be Inclusionist is nothing more than people that say, hey, I'm absolutely ambassador or a fan or an advocate of inclusion, and I want to learn more. And so it's not an ERG, it's not a club, but we've got learning paths. There's a job description, that we've talked about on some of the other conferences that gives people permission. Because I find that there are kind of blocks of things. There's people that are like, hey, yeah, I want to do this. And how do we empower them? You got a group in the middle that's like, yeah, I want to do something, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And you got a third that's anti. And I'm like, I'm not worrying about the anti. I want to focus on enabling the other. So we had created Be Inclusionist that empowered and asked people to be part of the solution. So whenever COVID hit, I had about 20% of our workforce that said, yeah, I'm ready to go. Put me to work. And so we've empowered them in ways that feel authentic to them to be part of the solution. So, one of our ERGs, Be Bold, our around race and ethnicity, particularly for Black workers, started doing what they called connection cafes. And they would do 2 of them a week. And it would be, one was kind of America's and European time friendly. One was Europe and APAC friendly. And they would just get on and have conversations around what people were experiencing. And so we've really tried to get as proximate to people and bring people together during these times, because people are really hungry. I mean, we're spending all the time on Zoom or, webinars or Blue Jeans or whatever the technology is, but how do we bring people together and let them have that sense of community? Mm-hmm. We also went through and asked managers to say, hey, look, we got business goals we need to deliver, and God knows travel's been impacted. But, I need you to get proximate to people and figure out what each person needs in order to be successful. If I use myself as an example, if I need to do deep head thinking work, me working from home in my office, which is where I'm now, is brilliant. But to get the day-to-day work done, it's a lot easier whenever I can sit down and have a cup of coffee with someone or have lunch. So I can flex back and forth, but we've got some employees. There's one of our ERG leads that's sitting around a table with 2 other roommates trying to do conference calls. And, and it's crowded and it's hard for them. And yet we've got other people that are by themselves. My partner was in London for part of lockdown, and I was in Amsterdam, and I was by myself too long. So we've said, hey, look, talk to each individual, figure out what they need to be successful, and how do we make that as easy as possible? We're not going to be able to do everything, but let's make it easy. So we empowered managers to go through and have those one-on-one conversations and try and do everything they could to help. We've got empowered rank and file colleagues to connect with each other. We've leveraged our diverse ERGs to go through and connect. And I'm not going to claim that we've gotten it all right, but we've tried to do as much as we know how to do and be responsive to what people need. Mm-hmm. But it's all about proximity.
Yeah. How do you, in terms of identifying and communicating with these kind of champions, DNI champions, how does that look like? Is it like an internal system they can see, when how do they know these activities are happening? What does that look like from a technical, practical point of view?
So we use Workplace, which is a version of Facebook. There's parts of it I love. There's parts of it I think are challenging, because I think we've all run into some challenges on Facebook with people we didn't know, In a 17 or 18,000 person organization, that happens as well sometimes. But we've got to be inclusionist group. We've got a group that's for Be Bold or Be Equal, our gender network, or Be Proud, our LGBT network, and so on. We even launched a shared group called Working Apart Together. And we've had regular content on well-being. We have Well-being Wednesday and Inclusion Mondays. But we've done things like we had an around the world dance party where we had employees that are DJs spinning music, and it went for 24 hours around the entire globe. It's
Wow.
some fun stuff, but it's also just whatever it takes to get proximate. And so it's opt-in. We're not saying you got to do this, but there's a spot whenever you feel you want to connect or you need to find some people. If you need to find your community, here's a way to do it that allows you to share.
And so that's all within the workplace app that they on their phone. So it's very easy. Accessible.
Yeah, web browser, whatever.
Nice.
But you could do the same thing with WhatsApp or Slack or anything else. I mean, I've seen lots of companies go through and just figure out how to promote that share of that sense of community.
Yeah, I love the idea of the connection cafes and everything else, because our biggest strength is our employees coming together. This is not a you and the team issue. This is an everyone issue, and I love it. I keep saying this over and over again, but I feel like even though we've physically been taken so far apart, I feel like we've never been closer.
Well, I completely agree. And even when you were talking about your backdrop behind you, I've got colleagues that constantly apologize whenever a cat walks across their desk, or the
screaming baby.
Screaming baby or whatever. And I actually really like it because there's something about, I was on a call early today and a delivery happened. And so in the middle of the call, I had to get up and walk away because the delivery person just kept hitting the buzzer. It's humanized this, and I think it's broken down some of the hierarchy. And I loved going through and seeing into some of my colleagues' life just for who they are. And I no longer have to imagine their kids. I know what their kids look like. And so we're able to connect on a whole different level. And we're asking, but kind of where we started, how you doing? We're asking it in a very different way today than we typically have.
Which kind of groups have you seen in the organization that have been kind of disproportionately affected over the last sort of 8 months?
Yeah, parents, particularly with lockdown and schools closures in some parts of the world, that's been a real struggle. Unfortunately, we are seeing that underrepresented groups, even from a health perspective, there's a whole host of healthcare disparities that are out there. And so, for example, we're seeing Black and brown people being disproportionately impacted, the death rates based on COVID. White men are actually dying at a higher rate. But part of that's because as white men, we tend to go through and not deal with our own preventative health in the same way that some other communities do. And so, there's some things where, I'm sure a lot of our underserved communities that are facing racism or violence and going to work in some parts of the world, the idea that I'm staying in my house and I don't have that train ride or that commute where I'm going to deal with those things has been a huge boost. And we've definitely seen that for some of our populations, where the fact that I can be in a place that's safe, because we're in, 220 markets around the world. And so people getting to work safely is a concern in some markets. Here in Amsterdam, I worry about getting run over by a bike, but I'm not. I'm not really worried about my physical safety getting to work, but I'm also, 190 centimeters and 100 kilos. I feel safe wherever I go, just about, except for the bikes in Amsterdam.
Yeah, and we're also seeing, I'm not sure if you've seen it as well, how women are being disproportionately impacted with being predominantly the primary carer. In most households. Are you seeing that?
Absolutely agree. And, I think there's, particularly around kind of women's equality, I think there's a real conversation about the need to redefine the roles we have and kind of what it means to be masculine and what it means to be feminine. I suspect, we haven't gone this deep before, but talking about your daughter, I suspect you're not a dad that wants to be a babysitter. No. You want to be a co-parent,
Yeah.
And so, I see cases, and actually there's stats that even show that men that take maternity leave actually have a higher wage penalty than women that do, because we're bucking a norm. There's a great article that came out of a magazine out of the US called The Atlantic, and it was titled "What I Learned About Being a Father" from RBG, and it was one of the clerks for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And he took a leave of absence from the court in order for his wife to do her medical residency. And he talked about the challenges he faced as a primary caregiver, as a dad. And I've heard this from a lot of men that are primary caregivers, where, there's a lot of comments around, oh, don't worry, you'll find another job. And frankly, there's not a respect for the fact that this is a conscious choice, that they want to actually give that opportunity. I was just reading how the CEO of Zappos has stepped down for his wife to be able to focus on her career.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I think
that.
real
Yeah.
opportunity.
Well, a large proportion of the CHROs I speak with are female, and a lot of their husbands are primary caregivers. And I've heard similar stories from them about when they've, expats in different countries. I asked, what's the biggest challenge? And I was always shocked in the beginning when they were like, the family life, like my husband being the primary caregiver, giving up his career to be, looking after our kids full time, which, as I said to you in our last conversation, for me, that's the harder job. I say to my wife all the time, like, I've got the easier job in this relationship of going to work and doing this, because, and not only that, now she's juggling her full-time job and looking after our daughter 2 days a week when she's not in nursery as well, which is super taxing. To happen as well. And a lot of people don't really understand, I don't think we're seeing the full impact of it, but I think we will in the months to come, because I'm already seeing, there's been times that my wife and I have been at breaking point. We've had a little cry, we've had an argument. We're all human, things slip through the cracks. We're not, no one's perfect, especially during these times, and we have to understand that that's actually taking place.
Yep. No, I completely agree. In the challenges and the expectations and roles. And, by and large, in most of the world, we as men get a pass on kind of child care and responsibility. And it ends up defaulting to the women to take care of. And, I'm not a fan of the language around work-life balance. I am a fan of work-life integration, because I think we need to have, and it sounds like y'all are having these conversations, to be very purposeful around who and when people are have primary child care responsibility. Last year, I had the opportunity pre-COVID to go on a 3-week business trip and visit most of our managers, or work with them in most of the Americas. And it was a choice I consciously made, realizing that I was going to miss time with my family. And so, how do we go through and be purposeful about the conversations we have, and make sure that there are trade-offs we're making, and it's not always, well, the sacrifice is made. How do you find that integration rather than balance? Because I think people think 50-50 when we talk about balance. Hey, Chris, one piece, I just realized I accidentally said it was the CEO of Zappos. Unfortunately, it's the CEO of Zappos that passed away recently. It was the CEO of the German brand, Zalando, I think it is. That's the fashion retailer who resigned. So I misspoke. My apologies for that.
Oh, no problems. Again, we're all human. So, something you mentioned to me before, I can't remember when you said it, but it stuck with me, and I've been thinking about it. You said it's impossible to have 2 alpha careers in a relationship. Share more around that, because I never really thought about it that way. Because before Robin came, our daughter, she's 2 now, I feel like there was a kind of a balance between my wife and our careers. We're both very much putting equal, and attention and time in, maybe me a bit more actually, into what I do. But it never felt like she had to sacrifice anything. All right, it was, we've been together for 14 years, so we're doing something right so far. And when you mentioned that comment, it kind of got me thinking how that's shifted over the past few years of myself and my wife. But share more on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and alpha careers is a bit of it's that idea of kind of an alpha mindset, which is problematic, and that's why it's kind of embedded in that language. But it is really difficult for 2 people to have 2 really ambitious careers in a multinational organization that maybe has relocation. So my husband is the former chief learning officer at Capgemini. I stayed at Deloitte for 10 years. And we had the conscious choice that his career was the primary driver. And part of the reason I stayed at Deloitte so long was we kept thinking we were going to get pulled to Paris, because he was commuting at points every 6 weeks, every month to Paris for a week or so. And so, I was at Deloitte, where if I had to move to Paris, I think Deloitte probably would have found me a role somewhere, figured out something that I could have done. those folks where people are going through and have careers that require relocation, or unfortunately sometimes being in a senior leadership role means that when something happens, it's your responsibility and there's no safety net, and if there's not someone else, you got to do it. And that may mean working weekends. Our CEO's been working 365 during COVID because of the impact we've had. How do we balance all of that? And so I think you get to a point where it's really difficult, particularly if you're going to have kids. We don't have kids, we've got a dog, but even navigating who's going to make sure the dog's taken care of is a balance. And there was a woman I worked with at Barclays that I respected a lot, that her husband, she was a very senior leader in investment banking, like C-suite level, serious. Her husband was a farmer. And so there were times of the year where she needed to respect the demands he had around harvesting and things like that, or it would be a complete loss. So whenever I talk about an alpha career, it doesn't mean investment banking. It means there are trade-offs you got to make. And so what I learned from her was we sit down and map out on a quarterly basis. And my husband and I do this to the day. We have a shared calendar where we post business travel and things like that in it, to be able to say, okay, you're doing that there, you're doing this here. When his grandmother fell and broke her hip, there were times I was commuting to the parents' house every week rather than him, but we were very purposeful around that integration I referenced. And so it's difficult to do, and there are trade-offs. So just make sure you're making those trade-offs in a way that doesn't take advantage of the other person.
Yeah. I love that. It's something we don't really talk about, but it's super important. And I think it's one of the reasons that my wife and I have had such a good relationship and then continue to, it's just that communication. I'll be honest, it's mainly on her part of in terms of the planning. So she always, I'm like, this is my schedule. And she's like, okay, let me now schedule everything in here around it. So we're always on the same page as well. She's incredible at doing that for me, but it just means that we're never in a situation where I feel like she's kind of fronting the full burden with everything and vice versa, and it just makes things very easy and transparent. Like today, after this call, I have our virtual parents evening, which is going to be interesting to see how we're getting on. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Last parents evening, this is pretty sad, but I'll say it live on LinkedIn. I actually cried.
My question for you is, why is that something that's not, why is that a big deal?
Because I thought it was quite weird, because we did this Robin's first parents evening. It was just like this realization that I have a daughter that's 1 year old, and I was just like, got a bit emotional. I was like, oh my God, I'm sitting here as a parent in parents evening, and kind of just this rush of emotions came, and had a little tear, and my wife was like, why are you crying? I was like, I'm just feeling really grateful and humble to be here, like, reading Robin's progress and seeing like her photos of her growing up in the nursery and everything. So it's kind of like, it was just, I shouldn't be ashamed of that, but it was just
Don't be ashamed of that, dude. I mean, I think that's actually a real testament. And the number one cause of suicide in the UK, and I'm going to get the ages wrong here, but it's roughly from 19 to 49, I think, for white men, is suicide. Because there's all this stuff where we're supposed to be strong, we're not, we don't have the same social networks and things like that. That's everyday inclusion as well. How do we go through and frankly, you'd be an ass if you weren't proud of your daughter and the progress she's making. And I'm really excited to hear that it caused an emotive response.
I'll let you know if I cry again.
Hey, nothing wrong with that, man. Nothing wrong with that. No shame. No shame.
A big challenge for many of your peers, because a lot of companies are still only introducing kind of heads of D&I or roles even now. It's very new in businesses. In all of the organizations that you've worked in, kind of what were some of the big challenges that you had to overcome to increase D&I efforts in those businesses that you could share with everyone, or perhaps to look out for?
Yeah, I was on another panel recently, and someone brought this up. Whenever we bring a new CFO in. And my apologies, because I don't remember the gentleman's name that said this. Nobody questions that. We never go through with finance and say, you know what, we've got enough, we're good. We don't need the CFO anymore or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I find that a lot of times people, they're used to, and Booking's notorious for this, we are one of the best at doing A/B testing on whether something works or not. So, if we go through and do something, we know the impact pretty well. On talent issues, it's incredibly hard, because is my one program going to go through and help someone get promoted? Maybe not. There was a mentoring program we did where we found that some of our women in technology in the pilot group, at the beginning of a program, only 23% felt ready for the next level or ready for promotion. Fast forward 6 months, at the end of the program, 100% felt. Now, that's something I get emotional about. That's brilliant. I'm excited about that. But most of the diversity and inclusion work is impossible to go through and quantify and say, did this have X impact out? Because it's a whole bunch of little nuances that go through and experience it. And there's often a belief that if we go through and celebrate any success in this work, that means we're going to slow down or we don't need to keep pushing forward. Mm-hmm. I try to go through, and sometimes people talk about it's all about tone in the top. And that's very true. You've got to have tone at the top. But you got to figure out how to involve the grassroots, because the culture of an organization, leaders go through and signal on it, but it's the way we treat each other day in and day out that really drives what the organizational culture is. And so, I've tried to go through and focus on what are the how do I go through and do something that's going to enable a group of grassroots employees like ERGs or Be Inclusionist Movement? And then how do I drop back with a center of excellence to do something that's systematic around pay equity? And then how do I work with leaders? And so you got to jump around and say there's no silver bullet. I got to be able to pull multiple levers, and then give some people the ability to do something around pay equity, and then drop back and do something else around in colleagues. That's hard to do. And we're going and being asked to solve a problem that humanity has never solved. We are not going to solve diversity and inclusion in 3 to 5 years. I doubt as humans we ever will. So how do we have the discipline, like going to the gym, to keep doing our diversity gym work? And
it's not a diet. It's not a diet. It's a lifestyle, right?
It's a lifestyle. That's exactly. Can I use that, my friend? Because I like that. It is a lifestyle. Yeah,
it's not because and that's I love explaining that to people as well. I want a diet. I'm like, no, don't do a diet. There's a reason why diets fail by design, because it's like there's an end date or there's an end goal. Why is that? And then you are right. We see that in inclusion. You wouldn't say it to a finance director or a CEO or a sales director that, okay, we've done that now. We no longer need it anymore. And we do see that with D&I, which is kind of crazy to think about that. But you're all right. It's not a project. It's not a kind of an exercise we go through.
Not an initiative. This is a way of working. Full stop.
Way of working. Yeah, definitely. It's not a D&I diet. It's a lifestyle. Nope. Yeah. Where do you before we wrap up? Where do you see we kind of just touched on that a little bit, but where do you see the impact of D&I on the future of work? Obviously the whole kind of term of future of work has shifted over the last 8 months, or what that even looks like. What impact do you feel like it will have on organizations and society kind of moving forward?
My personal belief is the future of D&I is truly around the broadest definition of corporate social responsibility. And in the entire life cycle. So I talk about the 3 C's. You got to start with your colleagues and make sure your environment, make sure your house is in order. You got to work on your clients. And so in the case of booking, that's like working with the property owners, be it, Hilton and Hyatt, that frankly have been doing D&I work longer than booking's even been in existence. But it's also the mom and pop, inn owner across the street from my house. And you got to think about customers. What do we do for our end customers? But then how do we align our corporate social responsibility and volunteerism to that? And again, back to the lifestyle model, we've got to think about the entire ecosystem on how we do this to be able to drive a different conversation. So it's not just about my people or just marketing or, just our customers. You got to think holistically. And I'll be honest with you and say, I don't know any organization that's figured this out. There are people that I think are doing interesting work in little pockets, but bringing that entire ecosystem together is exactly where we are. And people don't understand why I have responsibility for well-being, but also, volunteerism. And I'm like, it's part of that ecosystem. And I talk with my colleagues in sustainability and public relations that we meet regularly to talk about how we bring this together. And I think there's a lot more work for us and a lot more work for all organizations in this space. I love your lifestyle piece, man. I'm using that.
Well, someone on LinkedIn also said, don't drive inclusion, diversity, and belonging as a project or a target, but incorporate into your values. So I love that point. And you're 100%. I can't see the name of the person that commented that, but thank you, whoever that was, on that. But look, before I wrap up, I'm going to quickly jump into our quick fire round. I didn't warn you this was coming, but I don't warn anyone this was coming.
Bring it on.
So the first question is, what was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a leader and a global head of diversity and inclusion?
Owning me and my reality, and that my voice was valid. And you probably can figure I'm kind of take charge guy, but I was like, giving myself permission to go through and say, this is it. And other people may say this white American dude can't talk to us about diversity, but I'm not going to let those naysayers get in my way.
Yeah.
That's the politest way I can say it.
Yeah, I was about to say you've been very nice about that.
Yeah.
What was the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Actually, I alluded to it earlier. Ross Hudnall used to be the head of diversity for Intel and their head of their foundation. A phrase that I use all the time. People like to say that diversity and inclusion isn't rocket science. It's actually harder. We are being told, being tasked with solving a problem the world has never seen. The other one is, and this is another one that resonated with me, is the concept of dead right. You can be correct in what you say, but still lose the battle. Be strategic.
I've never heard that one before. Very, very interesting. What's kind of one book, or what's any more than one, if you want to mention more than one book you'd recommend to the audience, and why?
Two authors really resonate me. My apologies to women. There are two men in the diversity space. John Amici there in London is someone that I look to on a regular basis for insights. And Howard Ross out of the US has Everyday Inclusion. I'm going to butcher the title for this, but it's around our quest for belonging is tearing us apart, and a book around unconscious bias. Anything in those pieces, I think, are pretty seminal and very useful.
Mm-hmm. And what about online resources? Kind of what are your go-to websites or online resources where you kind of stay up to date with current events and kind of stay in the loop?
I belong to some groups, both with for example, the Conference Board, where it's a group of D&I leaders that connect on topics. There's the EMEA D&I Leaders Forum that's not hosted by an organization, but we just get together and kind of trade information. So things like catalyst.org I find very useful. McKinsey, we were talking about before, someone I respect a great deal. But I also try and just look at things like YouTube or TED Talks and find something. Someone shared, there's something today that's difficult conversations with a Black guy. And I've literally watched one earlier today, and I'll find it and share it with you so we can drop it in. And he was interviewing white parents that had a mixed ethnicity children, and having a really frank conversation around their experience.
Yeah.
I love it when people go through and share their truths, because we project stories on people all the time. It's the unconscious bias and the way our minds work. And just going through and having that conversation about their reality was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I could tell you some crazy stories about being a white dad with a mixed race kid.
Oh yeah, but I'd be willing to bet it's better than being a Black parent with a white child, because I'd be willing. I know from some friends of mine that has a white child but is Asian, and it's always assumed that he's the manny.
Oh no, my wife had that. So when Robin was first born, she was very light, almost white. And they kind of, the pigmentation gets a bit darker when they get a bit older. Yep. So it just looked like my wife had a white baby. And loads of parents kept saying, oh, you're the nanny, to my mum. I mean, to my wife. And she got for the first few months, she kept getting that reaction, and she got very upset, even to the point where, not to go into detail, but it's meant to be a quick fire round, but she went to pick up our daughter from the nursery, and one of the new nursery staff didn't call her out on it, but was like, really? Like, really, are you Robin's mom? Can you imagine turning up to pick up your child from nursery, and the nursery says, you're Robin's mom? Anyways.
I'm not surprised by that at all, but I can't, because I would have been losing my mind had I been.
Yeah, I'm smiling about it now in part, but at the time it was definitely not a laughing matter. And even I've had it when I picked up Robin from nursery, and they've kind of given me a little double take of But last question, what's one thing about your business that you're most excited about moving forward?
travel, and it was one of the things that took me to booking. Our mission is to make it easier for everyone to experience the world. And I sound very corporate speak and wonk when I say that, but me going outside of the United States for the first time was soul jarring because it was so different. And I do believe that travel is the ability to make anybody feel othered, you know. And so I love the fact that we can help people experience a different culture, and our ability to do that. I think we're all hungry to travel again, and our ability to go through and make the world better through travel is something I'm really excited about. Now, we got sustainability issues on carbon offsets for travel and things like that, that we work on. But, that ability to kind of and get inside someone's soul and realize that there is a different reality is a unique opportunity for travel. And that's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely love that. And one of the main things that I hear from your peers as well is they say in terms of defining a career is the fact they've traveled and experienced different cultures and lived it and breathed it and kind of been in the other shoes, even if it's for a few months. And they say that that's kind of profoundly impacted their career and their lives. As well, so it makes complete sense. But look, thank you so much, Chuck, for taking the time out to join. It's been a really fun conversation, and I really appreciate it. You're coming over to join us for Christmas, aren't you? Right, in the UK.
I am, after an appropriate period of quarantine. Looking forward to that. Brexit, some family situations that requires me go back to the UK for a bit. But looking forward to it. But thank you for having me. It's always an interesting conversation. I appreciate everybody listening. We need to be able to have frank conversations a lot more. We've had some provocative conversations. I hope it's useful for folks. And hey, if I said something or it landed differently, let's have that conversation. It's only through that engagement and that dialogue that we can actually truly change the world.
Exactly. Well, look, perfect. Enjoy the rest of your week, and look forward to seeing you again soon. For everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, comment, share, leave us a comment below. All of the resources we've been talking about will also link there as well for everyone. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your week, everyone, and I'll see you again tomorrow. So see you later, Chuck. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.